Awesome. So some of you have come on here from having seen the generative AI or rule-based automation CLE that I did for the California Lawyers Association recently. And so you'll be familiar with this term of rules-based automation. And for those of you that weren't on that particular one, this is just the idea that this is a type of traditional AI where you as the lawyer can actually set in motion some standard procedures and rules to automate things in your practice, such as documents. So this really works well in different practice areas where you have a lot of templates that you use, very document heavy or document based, which is pretty much everybody. But things that where you can add different rule language, sort of if the person is married and they have children and they are in this jurisdiction, then I want you to show these 3 clauses, that type of thing. So we're going to go into what that looks like versus, we won't go into the generative AI piece as much. I'll just kind of mention it a little bit, but we're going to really focus and hone in on this section around what is rules-based automation. What does that look like in practice? And we're going to be using the example of Gavel as a rules-based automation tool for lawyers to take their templates and turn them into workflow automations where you don't have to duplicate your template and then go in and manually type everything, and how you can really reuse data that you already have instead of retyping information manually. So I created a little resource for everybody that we can follow along with. I will share that in the chat here in a second. And as I mentioned, this is really just a way to visualize what it looks like when we're trying to think about the different elements of automation for lawyers. So let me just share this here. Start getting used to some of the different features within Zoom. So that should be in your chat now. And essentially the first one that we're going to go through is this idea of journey mapping. So we'll do a short exercise around journey mapping. We'll go into this concept of data repurposing. So the way that this particular resource is laid out is that we have these 7 different categories. We have journey mapping, data repurposing, this idea of conditional logic. So how can we have things show or hide depending on the rules that we set, as I mentioned, for rules-based automation. Then we have repeating items, document tagging, customization, and productization. So I thought it might be helpful because these words mean basically like nothing right now until we know what the concepts are and have seen some examples. So I think to kind of hone in on what each of the core message of each of these pieces are is helpful with a key question. So the key question when we're thinking about journey mapping is, what am I optimizing for? So why are we trying to automate at all? Like what pieces are we trying to automate and where is it useful? Under data repurposing, the question we want to think about is, can I reuse data that I already have? So how can we repurpose information that's already living somewhere? The next one is going to be that conditional logic piece, which has a key question of what does it hinge on? And I'll give you an example of what that might look like. Repeating items, this is going to be something where it could be, the number could be 0 or 100 or 4 or whatever number we don't know, why we would want to use something like a repeating item. Document tagging, what that looks like for Word and PDF, if you're using both in your particular workflow. Customization is, can I make it match my brand? So can I, all of us have our different personalities, as you saw. We have a mojito, we have a cheerleader, we have all sorts of different people on the call. And how can we make the essence of like our workflows, and if they're client facing, how can we make those represent who we are as people and our brands that we want to project into our clients? Then we have this piece around productization, which is a trend that we're seeing people using our platform for, where they're not just using it for internal automation anymore, they're actually really using it to scale their practices by offering client-facing legal products, such as Hello Divorce, for example, and I'll show you some other examples like DOS Docs and Counsel Your Docs and My Trustee and all sorts of different ones that are really representing the future of legal services and how we can engage in that as well. So the next section where it says like the A to Z spiral and these different things are really meant to serve more as a memory aid for this concept. So we'll go into the A to Z spiral next. And then each of these will make sense as we go along. And then the bottom section is really more just pulling out some different activities or pieces that you can remember that we hit on as we go along. And then the exercises at the bottom, we're going to do one main one today. And then I'm going to be building out a little mini course that I can share with you that's going to be free that you can do along with, let's say, a free trial of Gavel for 7 days. And each day you can do an exercise that helps you understand that element a little bit better and have a more practical example of what that looks like with your own documents as well, or within a document that I can provide as well. So essentially, let's start with this idea of journey mapping. So Ashley and I were playing with the whiteboard feature in Zoom. As I mentioned, I haven't used like everything on here, but let's make sure that this is working. So I have this board. Can everyone see this? Maybe somebody give me a go off of mute and just let me know. I can see Hannah's. Perfect. So everyone can see this, right? Somebody give me a shout out.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm like, is anyone there? Perfect. So the reason why I think about it as a spiral is when I first thought about how we can think about journey mapping for this first section is that maybe you might conceptualize, or maybe I conceptualized serving a client as going from point A to point B. A customer engages me for services, and then I deliver those services, A to B, right? And actually, when I thought about it a little bit more, the journey for our client starts a lot farther back. And then for us, there's a lot of different things that go on behind the scenes that the client doesn't see. So I think of it more as this sort of hand-drawn spiral that you see here in the middle of someone actually going from A to Z with us, because there might be other opportunities to upsell. The journey can start farther back. So if you wanted to follow along in a sort of exercise, you can grab a piece of paper and a pen and, map your own process or journey as well, because I feel like this is how I might conceptualize this, but there may be different points in the way that you serve your clients. Maybe you have the subscription model. Maybe you have a one-time flat fee model. Maybe you have clients who are digital only. Maybe you go in court a lot. So there's going to be differences, but I just wanted to give you an example of how you might think about or conceptualize mapping out the journey that your client goes through and that you go through on the same side in parallel to what they're doing, right? So on the side of the client's journey here, they might start, we're thinking, new leads who have not heard of you, haven't been referred, for example. This is somebody who would be a fresh lead and they're trying to discover you as a firm. So they might start in a search engine doing a keyword search. And the way that you, on your journey, in your side, are trying to capture that lead is through things like SEO optimization of your content on your website. This could be things like sponsored ads. And so you can kind of see how client is doing something on one side and you have your parallel, back behind the scenes to capture that lead. Next, you might have the person might view something like a blog or a video or other resources you might provide on your website. You, on the other hand, are creating those marketing assets and lead magnets. On the other side here, then they go through the journey of booking a consultation with you because you've built trust and you've demonstrated expertise. On your side, you're using tools like Calendly or HubSpot or Clio Grow, or this should actually say Leadly. I think it did like a autocorrect, but Leadly, which Ashley uses and might show you today, any kind of CRM or booking appointment calendar, something like that. Then you have them sign the agreement, you engage the client, they pay, you deliver services. You can see how this works, right? They might ask you for additional services. You might offer some upsells. So you can see how this would go through a lot of different pieces of the puzzle to have someone go from being a new lead to being an engaged client who has achieved their desired outcome with you. So if you wanted to take a second to kind of go through your own journey mapping, you can think about where your starting point for your client might be and what your side of this spiral might look like. And then I want to give you an example of what this might look like as well. I'd love to hear from Michael. Go ahead, Michael. You have
Yeah,
your hand up.
I got a question, just real quick. This journey mapping, is this part of the program, or is this just a game? No, does Gavel provide this?
I will be providing a little exercise that you can do like this as part of the 7-day challenge, you could say. So it's an exercise that you can go through to think about your own starting point and the end point of your customer and the different touch points along the way that could be automated, essentially.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, that's a great question, though. So yeah, this is something that, this is just the way that I think about it, and it helps me to see what might be automated along the user's journey, and that we're optimizing not only for our client's journey, but also for our internal process as well. So a good example of what this might look like when we're thinking about how we might use a tool is something like this. So let's say that I have a firm that specializes in US veteran law, and somebody will search for different key terms, starting with that search engine and keywords, and they're going to land on a blog post that I have on my website about how they might be able to get $117,000 to adapt their home to accommodate for a service-connected disability. Now, because I use Gavel, I'm able to create something that I can embed directly into this. For example, something like this, where I'm giving them what I call, this is something I refer to or conceptualize as a lead qualifying intake magnet, where I am using this piece as a lead magnet for somebody to go to my website over a competitor, because they are able to instantly see whether they may or may not be eligible for this type of grant, and giving them some clues about what might be something that would qualify for them for this. But at the same time, we're actually qualifying them to work with us as well. We're learning and putting them down different paths, and I'll show you what that looks like with this tool. And at the same time, we're intaking their information and qualifying them as a client. So here's an example. When we have somebody who is a disabled veteran, they have the opportunity to apply for different types of grants to help them modify their homes if they have a disability, right? So there are 3 hinges. So when we go back to this concept of conditional logic that I hinted at before, for this section here, just keep this in mind. There are this question of what does it hinge on? It hinges on 3 things. One is whether they have one of the following service-connected disabilities, and then they can put in their information. So let's say that they have none of them. So let's continue and see what happens. So we get their information and they're taken to the end. Now, if they have none of the qualifying service-connected disabilities, then they likely will not qualify for this type of grant. And actually, something happened here that I need to fix. But if they instead have, let me go ahead and change this one here. If they instead have one of these other following service-connected disabilities, then they're going to see something else. I broke something here, sorry, just check. Okay, so on this section, we're gonna see here that now they see a different screen, right? They will be using the grant money to buy, build, or change their permanent home, and they weren't taken to the end of the workflow, right? Because we wanna ask them a few more questions. Here, we're asking them whether they own or will own the home. And if they say no to the first question, but they don't see that third question. And if they say yes, they do see the third question. And this is because in my case, there are 3 conditions that need to be met in order for this person to qualify for this type of grant. They need to have a qualifying service-connected disability. They need to be using the grant money to buy, build, or change their permanent home. And we need to know if they are going to use them, if they own or will own the home. So in these different examples, you can see how we are starting to collect information about this person and leading them down different paths depending on their answers. And at the same time, what's happening in the background is this person's information is being collected in our data manager in Gavel. So we're able to see the answers that people have given to this question, and we're able to repurpose this information in future workflows. So we're already hitting these first 3 sections here, right? Journey mapping, what we went through is they're starting with this search engine. We want to lead them to our website. We want to capture their information and repurpose it, which I'll show you now. But we're also seeing those hinges where, let's say you're in your particular field, you would be asking different questions, right? So think about what are your hinges to make it to where somebody would be an ideal client for you. Or think about as well something that you could offer as a piece of the puzzle that doesn't fully answer the question, but gives them some piece of value. So one example is when I first started off in this realm of, I'm just going to pull this up really quick. And if anyone has any questions as well, let me know. Michael, your hand is still up, but if you, is that from before? Or do you have another question?
No, sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay. I just want to make sure I caught you if you did. I just want to double check. You're okay. If anyone else has any questions, feel free to ask it throughout as well, because as I mentioned, I want this to be a little bit more interactive, so you can ask when you have questions. We'll still keep some time at the end. But do feel like you can speak up if you have a question. So when I first started being a lawyer back in 2020, oh man, that feels so long ago, but so short at the same time. I had my own practice. I was a solo, and I took a course on legal technology, and I was thinking a little bit about how could I give a resource to someone who doesn't know that much about copyright law, and give them that piece of it. And so I came up with this idea of a little chat style where you could ask, you could go through a sequence of questions similar to how I just showed you, going through a flow of, if you wanted to register a new work, if you say yes, then you get down one branch. If you say no, you go down another branch. I had one for if you wanted to pre-register work. So the idea here is that you can apply this in different contexts. It doesn't have to be just the idea of SAH grant eligibility. It can be in estate planning. It can be in intellectual property. And you can kind of see how you might think about, in this one, I was saying, if you want to register a new work, do you want to register one work or more than one? And then I would invite them to hire me to register the copyright for them. But I've given them a little piece of information around, how they can do that. And my hinges were things like whether they want to register a new work, whether they want to pre-register, whether they have one work or more than one, whether it was photographs, whether it was, all these different pieces. So you find what your hinges are, and then use that logic to help determine the flow. So what does this look like once you've collected that information, as we're thinking about the journey that the client goes through? So once they have, gone through this process, you can have an email automatically sent to them that invites them to book a time with you. You have your initial consultation, you do your conflict checks to make sure that you don't have any conflicting interests. And then you engage them as the client. So as I talked about with data repurposing, this is the idea that we want to be able to reuse data that we already have. We've already collected their name and their address and all these pieces of information that we can use over and over again. So what we want to do is be able to let that information flow from one workflow to another. Or if you use something like a legal practice management software, such as Clio Grow or Clio Manage, or if you use, as Ashley does, something called Leadly, or any of the other tools such as Locus, or, there are many, many different competitors in the market. So I'll show you a couple of ways that you might do this. So the first would be that you just keep everything in Gavel. So for example, like I said, you've already collected information here about this person. So what we can do is just go to our data manager, select the workflow. So in my case, the workflow that I was just showing you is called an eligibility for a specially adapted housing grant with a decision letter. I can just choose a session, or I can search for a session based on whatever information as I'm getting ready to prepare an engagement agreement. What I can do then is just push that information into a second workflow, such as in this case, a limited scope engagement agreement. So I'm not having to retype any information that's already been entered. I'm just adding whatever new information that wasn't collected in that first workflow. So that's why it counts as this sort of intake, lead magnet, and qualifier. So now I've just pushed that information from what we collected on our website to our limited scope engagement agreement internally so that it can prepare this for that new client, right? So I'm just gonna click through, give it a name or matter title. I can include different services. This is a preview of a repeating item where I can add between 1 to 100 of anything that I want. I can have different options pre-populate as well if I use this often, and there are a lot of things that come up over and over again. For example, I'm excluding that we're going to assist with any appeals. I'm also excluding any litigation related to this dispute if there were any disputes arising, for example, from them wanting to apply for this type of grant. And once I'm done making these different elections and having repurposed that information, I can see the draft before I submit this for signature. So I can see that I have their name and everything is formatted here as I like in my traditional template. I could even have something that has a signature block, have conditions around it based on which attorney is assigned to this case. I can see all these different pieces, the name of each of the parties, as well as the different things that I said were included versus not included. And then I can actually submit this for DocuSign signature here. And I can also see within my data manager whether it has been signed yet or not after I've sent that to the client. So that is how we can see how I can see sent for signature or whether it was completed. So that's how we're hitting some of these initial pieces around going through that process of mapping out what the client is doing, what we're doing, and what the different touch points are along the way. So that it's not very linear. It's actually, they do something, then we do something, then they do something, then we do something on the back end. We can take that information that was collected and turn it into something else or transform it. And then you saw those little pieces of conditional logic and repeating items. But I wanted to address that piece around integrations, or if you have that information living somewhere else outside of Gavel. So let's say, for example, you use Clio to manage your matters, just because we have an internal or a native integration for this. But if you use other tools as well, you can also connect them through a tool called Zapier. And then we also have an integration on make.com as well if you use that. Then other tools have also integrated with us, such as Leadly and Decision Vault. So if you're in estate planning, Decision Vault is very popular in estate planning, and they have a Gavel integration as well. So that's just to show you that, let's say you do use Clio. So what if you want to keep your information here and reuse that information in Gavel? You can do that. So an example of what that might look like is, let's say you're preparing in a different realm. We're going to go outside of the military example now to prepare a uniform statutory form power of attorney for California. So all we would need to do in this case is look for our case, select it, and then all of the information about our client will be pre-populated. So we have this matter around Lopez, syncing to this matter in here as well. And the information that's here is pulling from this custom contact field here, where we can see that their address has automatically pulled through here as well, because we've chosen that that person is this person's selection for their agent. We can also then just choose what powers they want to have, if they want to grant the power over all of the above areas, or we can choose specific ones, not all of them, for example. And then we can decide whether they want to continue if they become incapacitated, whether they want to list any additional special instructions or any other questions that you might ask in order to complete this particular document. We can see the power of attorney is ready, and then we can send that off for our client to get that notarized. And we can see that we have our different elections here, and then also that if we had more than one agent that was designated, we'd actually see their information here. This my agents would turn into agents, and attorney in fact would turn it into attorneys in fact, and a whole other section would show as well. So you as the lawyer are actually able to have control over these rules-based automations, because this allows you to create your own workflows like I've created as these examples, and you can do that using document tagging. So we talked a little bit about repeating items, but I want to show you an example of this piece around how you would actually do this. So I've created thank you to Ashley for providing this probate receipt example. And so let's say, for example, that we are going to, sorry, let me pull up this other one. Let's say that we have this template where anytime we want to prepare a receipt of distribution for someone, we have to go through and, go through all of these different pieces and update them for multiple different heirs. There's an easier way to do this, and all you have to do is create a workflow, tag it once, and then anytime you want to use it, you just run it. So I'll show you the completed version of this first. So you can start from scratch like this, where we just say run, or if you've collected some of this information in advance, you would go through that same process of pushing information from one workflow into another. And so in this case, let's say that the decedent's information is that their name is Charlotte Johnson, and the personal representative in the decedent's estate is myself, Brittany Hernandez. Let's say that the court county is Pulaski and the state is Arkansas. These are the different pieces of information. Then we just put in the heirs information. As I mentioned, if you already collected this information, you would just push it, but just so that you can see what this would look like. And they're getting $5,000. We want to add another one, then we can say Oliver Twist, and he's getting $7,000. And then one more person, let's do Ashley Johnson, and they're getting $10,000. We can continue. Now, instead of me having to individually duplicate this template and go through and change everything, what's going to happen instead is the system is going to automatically populate 3 separate documents for me so that I don't have to do that myself. So instead of me going through and saying, distribution amount for this and this and this in each section, you can see that each person has received their own separate receipt of distribution, individualized for those separate people. And each of their different receipts has the information specific to them. $5,000, their particular name here and here, and the county and state and all of that has been populated, as well as for Oliver Twist, who has $7,000. And you can see, how this would be useful if you had 30 of these or 20 of these. So that's how that would work. And the way that you would create this is you would just say new workflow. You can start with documents, which would be using our generative AI feature, or you can start with questions where you give it a name. So I'm going to say something like demo PJ Power Hour, and then I'll say create. And all we need to do is choose the questions, give this a name for this particular first page. I'm just going to say something like welcome. And this is something called rapid development, or like this kind of idea of no code development, where you don't have to know how to code. You just need to know what you want in each place in order to automate that document. So in our case, we have our template here, and we need things like the decedent's name and the county. So we just know that those are going to be text. So we'll say we want text. We give it a question title, such as which county is this case in? And then we can give it a variable name. So a variable name is something that could be different from person to person or case to case, but the question would remain the same, right? So this question is the same, the answer would be different or vary from person to person or case to case. So this could be something like, this could be like case county or court county, but you get to choose what that is. All you have to do now is save this and run it, and you already have started to build out what this workflow would look like. Now, from there, all you would need to do is connect your Word. So if you're working in your Word documents already, just go to the document tagger within Gavel, which you get from going to add-ins and just finding Gavel or searching for Gavel and just saying add. There's a couple more steps here, but we'll go through that in the little mini course that I'll send to you guys when it's ready. We're going to just sign in here, find our workflow that we're working on. So in this case, I'm looking for this PJ Power Hour one, and then I can interact directly with whatever I create here directly into Word. So I can say, for example, take that question that I just made, take that variable and put the answer right here where it says county name. And I can do that by just saying simple variables, finding that case county one that I made here and saying insert with the format as all uppercase. So I just say insert that variable. I can make sure that this is also bolded so that when it comes out, it matches. And that's how you do it. That's all you need to do. If you wanted to do any conditions, like we saw with that idea of adding conditions to things, all you need to do is just drag in this whole section around whatever you want to be conditional. And then you say show phrase when, add your conditions. When this variable is, in this case, it should be like yes or no, or have some different questions, but you just choose blank and say insert, and it's going to do that for you. So you don't have to know how to code in order to do that or engage with this process of automating your own templates. Michael, question.
Okay, so you're saying you can you can type out the variable questions in any order, and then you go back in the document, and then you could put them where you need them.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, great question. Does anyone else have any questions right now as we're at this juncture? Because I'm about to kind of go through this a little bit faster towards the end so that Ashley has some time to show this too. Thanks, Michael. Great question. But yeah, so essentially you get the opportunity as the lawyer to go through and customize how these documents look on output, how they are, tagged as you go through, figuring out where the logic goes. We do have ones that are pre-built out for you if you're looking at this and thinking like, I don't even have time to do that. We do have the ones right now for estate planning and probate and family law as like ones that we built out for you to use that are more standard forms with more to come. So you can check those out as well. But just to show you that if you have very custom templates that you want to be able to automate, this is a really good tool for that. If you want to check out some of the pre-built ones, I'll put that link in the chat for you as well. Okay, so let's go through the last pieces so that Ashley can share her experience with these different tools and how this works in her practice too. But first, let me just double check on the last pieces I wanted to show you. Really just around the piece on customization and productization. So on the customization piece, I wanted to just kind of point out that, as I mentioned, if you have your own colors and fonts and logos and things like that, and you want to have any of this be client facing, you can make that match your brand colors and fonts and things like that. And there's actually someone who is one of our Gavel experts that created a tool for free that makes you do this really easily for free. Like, you're able to do this very easily by using with like different toggles. So it's called the custom CSS generator. Let me just find it for you really quick. Just so you can kind of see what that looks like and get you that link. And what this does is it makes it to where you're able to just choose really easily through, I'll just show you. It's easier to just share. So when you log in and create a free account, it looks like this. So you can see what the workflow would look like if you didn't change anything. And then you can just go through and say, I don't want a header. I don't want someone to be able to log in. I want to have a different background color. I want to have a different link color. you can just go through and just choose what you want. And then you can make it look like exactly how you want your workloads to look. Similar to how we had on my website here, where the workflow is an embedded Gavel workflow on my website, but the colors match my brand. So on the last piece, we're going to just briefly talk or touch on productization. And I mentioned that's really this idea of how can you scale your practice by using Gavel to create legal products. So we're seeing this in lots of different spaces, and I'll just share a couple of examples. So these are some examples of people who have built tools that are client facing on Gavel, and are making quite a bit of money on them. And it's just finding that right starting point for your particular client, right? So when we think about that client journey, we're also thinking about your ideal customer profile and what would be the most useful thing to them, starting from one thing first and then branching farther out from that. So Hello Divorce, for example, focuses on DIY divorces, and they've raised over $5 million in venture capital to build out for all 50 states, but they started with one and with just the forms for one individual to start the process. And then they graduated to having a tiered system where they do some hybrid services. DocDocs is a more marketplace style where they have single documents for mortgage lenders, and they range from $199 to $399 per document. Counsel Your Docs is one that does shareholder agreements in Canada. So you can see a range of different examples of how this looks in different sectors. So I just wanted to briefly give Ashley some time now to have the floor to talk about how she uses it in her practice, and answer any questions from you guys as well.
Let's see if I can share my screen here. Choose one of the 5. This is actually not what I intended to show you all, but if you have any 594 question PDFs that you need to fill multiple times, Gavel can do that. My brother is a doctor and I'm working on his credentialing. So Gavel is coming in handy for that. But how we use it, right now we're using it for a little bit of everything, but I think the easiest thing to show you is this Medicaid quiz. This quiz is built with Gavel and Leadly. So basically the potential client goes through, answers the quiz. Gavel sends the information back over to Leadly. Leadly runs it through. There's a little bit of math. I'm in finance, not math. Numbers and dollars are drastically different despite what people think. But Leadly does the math for us and brings us down here and then automatically sends an email with the results. So once they submit the quiz, they get this email and shows their results. I answered 3 out of 5 correctly. This is just kind of a lead magnet for us. It gathers their info, and once they're in, and of course they consent to receiving additional information from us, Leadly works on sending that out. I like to show this dashboard because some people like to see, okay, I'm paying for Gavel, but how much money does it make me back? So the time frame for this is, what is this, August 4th through September 3rd. Gavel made me $3,000. So that was just from a passive lead magnet on my website. Now, this is only the dashboard for that particular survey, but once they hire us to do the application, or if we're doing a plan, then it takes them back to Gavel where we gather additional information, and then it syncs with I'm very techy. I have all the tech, have everything. So if we're sending it over to Locus because we need to do a guardianship in conjunction with the Medicaid, it syncs over to Locus. If we now need to handle a spouse's estate planning separate from the applicant spouse's Medicaid application, if we have kids that are that need powers of attorney because they're going off to college, Gavel talks to all of our systems. And also for the data people who like to know where everything's going, it talks to all of our data generators as well. I wanted to keep that very brief because I know you all probably have questions and I don't want to overload you with all of my tech. So
that's super helpful. I thought that was really interesting that you're able to see how much it saved you. So that's a really good point as well. So thank you, Ashley. So we do have a few minutes for questions before we start to close out. So if you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat or just unmute and ask your question now as well. But while you're thinking of your questions, I can just kind of recap us on what we learned, and then give you our contact information if you want to reach out to us more individually to ask questions as well. So just thank you for being here, and to kind of show you this one more time, we talked today about journey mapping, the idea that we have this more of like a customer spiral, you could say, from A to Z, where they are going through a particular journey, and we want to map over what we're doing behind the scenes and think about how we might be able to automate some of those different pieces. Data repurposing, how can we take information that we already have and use it in different ways so we're never retyping something that we already have in a system, either in a legal practice management software, in Gavel itself, in Leadly, whatever you use. How can we think about the different hinges that we have in that example of the FAH grant eligibility? What are the hinges that you have in your practice? Repeating items. So if we have something like children, shareholders, heirs, any kind of something where we don't know how many there are from the beginning, how can we harness this technology to populate those documents and generate multiple for us without us having to manually go through and do that ourselves? Document tagging, we can do that with Word. I showed you Word, but you can also do this with PDFs as well. Customization, how can we make this match our brand? And then productization, what can I offer at scale? And I gave you some examples of what that looks like too. So here's our information. You can reach me directly at brittany@gavel.io, or you can reach out to Ashley to ask her some more questions about how she's doing things at her practice, which I think is really generous for her to share, you know, because there could be competitors on the call, but I think she's so generous to just say, this is what we're doing. It's helped us. You know, we're getting a lot of, you know, business from this. How can it help you as well? You can reach out to her at ashley@rsalawgroup.com as well. So thank you all so much for sure for being here. And yeah, just reach out to us individually if you have any additional questions. Thank you to Ashley for being here. And I hope you all learned something from this. And thank you for sharing your interesting facts. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much for the presentation.
Thanks, Michael. Bye,
Thank you.
Natalie. Thank you, Hannah.